check comes the same day, you know. That's not gonna affect him, right? He doesn't have a CDL or anything. He just got an operator's license. Shouldn't affect him. You and Steve got those good jobs.
Yes, sir.
No. One. Two on a good day.
That's good.
Well, I have 4:31. At this time, we'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Canyon City Commission to order. And with that, Mr. Ray, please.
Father, we come before you this evening. We are grateful for a lot of things. We're grateful that you allow us to live in a great country, and Father, we're also grateful that you allow us to live in Canyon. Father, tonight we continue to ask for your protection on the good folks that work for the city, our first responders. Father, we thank you for leading us through this pandemic. Pray for your continued protection as we go through it a little bit more. Father, help us make wise decisions tonight. So we may pray.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, that takes us to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of November 15th, 2021. That's before us. Have a motion and second to approve the minutes as written. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. All right, takes us to item number 5, public comment. Comments from interested citizens. Ready?
I do not have any funding.
Okay, thank you. And now at this time, we are going to go ahead. Okay. Let's go ahead and address item number 6 then. That is the first reading of resolution number 40-2021, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Canyon approving a project funding agreement between Absolute Restaurant Operations LLC and Canyon Economic Development Corporation relating to direct financial assistance and job creation incentives for a new business. Vicky's Place to be located at 1512 Fifth Avenue, Suite 102 through 104. Ellen?
Thank you, Mayor and Commission. This project was brought to the CDC. We started talking with them about midsummer, and this person, Mickey Foster, is the owner of Absolute Restaurant Operations, and he has 20-plus years of prior restaurant experience. Rockfish Grill is where he opened up their stores, where he gained that experience. But he has recently taken a lease on the space that we had empty where Barrel and Pie was and where Recreation. So that would be the whole west side of the shops on Fifth Avenue. And he is currently undergoing a good renovation for that. He will have 35 to 40 employees, part-time, full-time, and he's going to be open 7 days a week. And I was over there the other day. I think it's going to be a really, really good. He wants a family-friendly atmosphere and a good price point on the menu items, because he really wants the families to come in and be able to be his customer. Primarily, the menu is going to be Italian, which the EDC had requests for Italian food for 10, 15 years, ever since we've been around. So anyway, that was always a request. We don't have Italian food. So I think it's going to be really, really good for Canyon, and then that will open it up so that we can go back and promote our downtown dining district marketing plan. So.
So this will be where recreation and barrel pipe make up that
Yes,
side.
the entire west side of that, and it's a 5-year lease. So he's really excited. I think he'll be a great addition to the community. He and his wife have 3 children. They have bought a property out just right outside of the city limits, north here, and he has family that lives here, so that's why he ended up here. So anyway, super nice, and really seems to be a hard worker.
So most of it's remodeled.
Most of it's remodeled.
I know they had a shared kitchen between those 2 establishments.
And so they're doing a little bit of that. He's using a local contractor for the remodel, and then obviously using a local bank lender for that. So anyway, I kind of look at it this way. It was kind of meant to be, because that spot's been vacant, I think, for 2 years.
Recreation's one.
And Girl and Pop. It'll be 2 years in February. This coming February. So this is the first reading of resolution, so there's not any action required.
Does anyone have any questions or the way this incentive is structured?
Your funding agreement has a watermark on it, draft. The owners of this project are looking at the agreement right now, so hopefully we'll have that wrapped up and the watermark, the draft, removed from the final funding agreement. Next meeting.
Any other questions for anyone on this one? Okay. If there are no questions, this is reading only at this point. And that would take us to item number 7, first reading of resolution number 49-2021. Resolution of the City Commission of the City of Kenyon approving a project funding agreement between Map Food Group and Kenyon Economic Development Corporation related to business retention and expansion project for buses located at 2201 4th Avenue, Kenyon, Texas.
Kobe Monroe is the primary managing member of Map Food Group, and he also owns Joe Taco here in Canyon, Joe Taco in Amarillo, Macaroni Joe's. So obviously we're very familiar with him. He's been a great partner for the community. He had the opportunity to purchase a building right next to Buff's, and it's about 4,000 square feet. The late A.J. Peters owned that building, and so what now is the original Buff's is going to be the kitchen, all kitchen. And so then all of the new dining space, which is going to be about 125, 130, is about right? That's going to be in the building, the new part. So he's just going to absorb that square footage into the existing stuff. Keep his drive-through. So he is not anticipated to open until mid-summer. And he is going to have create 18 jobs, full-time and part-time, and then he is going to it's going to be a nice addition. We went through the variance process for the parking last night, 2 months ago, and that was granted. So the parking is not really, it is going to be an issue, but it's not going to be an issue. So he didn't have to define however many parking spaces he needed for 200 people or 140 people. So
On-street parking.
Yeah.
Off-street parking.
Off-street parking, yes. So anyway, he's been a good partner for us. He runs a very, very, very good business. And we're really excited that that building is going to have something in there. It's been empty for a long time.
Any other questions on this one for Brenda? And on this one, I will abstain. Okay, thank you, Ellen. Well, I appreciate it. That one also is first reading only. Let Chris and vote again. Thank you. All right, item number 8 is to consider and take appropriate action on resolution number 44-2021. The resolution of the City Commission of the City of Canyon, Texas, Pringle County, Texas, authorizing the submission and acceptance of grant application to the Office of the Governor for the B.J. Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program for technology improvements for the City of Canyon Police Department, and authorizing the Chief of Police to represent the city in all matters pertaining to the application. Chief Ruff?
Well, I've changed a little bit.
Much better.
Oh, well, that's not too bad. All right, hey, thank you for your time. Yeah, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Justice Assistance Grant that we have applied for this year. Generally speaking, we do this with a technology improvement in mind. We've taken advantage of this grant several times over the past few years, and this year we've been tentatively approved, pending this resolution, for the purchase of 30 Surface laptops. This is going to allow the officers, more than just the officers out on the street, but every officer in the police department to have their own individual laptop to go along with the docking port in each of the cars, as well as at their desk. And that's just going to allow the officers to be able to utilize the same computer in the PD and out in their patrol car. And a lot of our officers have dual assignments, and so they can use those when they're called out. And the surfaces are actually all touchscreen, so we're hoping that it will actually be utilized to a higher degree than our current laptops out in the car. The JAG grant is a 50-50 grant, meaning that the city can provide matching funds. And for this particular grant, we were actually approved for additional, more than just 50% by PRPC. They had some additional funding available. And so the cost from the city's standpoint is going to be $24,684, of which we do have in the 2021 and 2022 budget.
Total project cost, Matt, remind me.
I don't have that number for you. I can get that for you.
Good deal to me. I move that we adopt resolution number 44-2021.
Second. Have a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Thank you. All right. Item number 9 is to consider and take appropriate action on ordinance number 1146, annexing territory to the City of Canyon as requested by Bent Creek LLC. An ordinance of the City of Canyon, Texas, annexing the territory herein described to the City of Canyon and Randall County, Texas, extending the boundary limits of the City of Canyon to include the property herein described within the said city limits, and granting all inhabitants of said property all the rights and privileges of other citizens, and binding said inhabitants by all of the acts, ordinances, resolutions, and regulations of said city. Okay?
Thanks, Mayor. You guys remember you took action on this a little over a month ago. We held 2 public hearings at one time and approved this project for the final action tonight. So tonight we'll wrap it all up with adoption of this ordinance. At this point, all the public hearings have been met, and Chuck's worked hard to meet all the legal requirements. As you can see in your agenda package, you have the original letter of request. This is going to be just south of the cap, and then south of this piece of property. If you guys remember, a few years back, we annexed a piece of property for a skilled nursing facility, which had yet to come around. But this is directly south of that, and you can see on a map they provided, a drawing, a survey, they provided a drawing of these, it's really 3 pieces of property we're annexing. The property itself, where the 72 unit senior slash subsidized housing will be. That blue box that you see on that drawing is the rectangle going back out towards Highway 7. That would mark where we're going to have them dedicate and extend 17th Avenue over there. That'll be the primary access to that property. That yellow marked area, the track 3, I think it is, yellow mark, that's what they originally designated for. I believe they thought they were going to tie into the sewer line over closer to the pool, or what we call lift station number 2 over at Creekmere. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but that's on this annexation at this point in time. At a later date, you guys are going to receive the plat for this property. So there's also just for future reference, that 17th Avenue is going to extend on west and meet with 18th Street coming down from the north. We're not having them annex that at this point. We're just simply having them dedicate that on the plat. But 17th Avenue will be constructed at their expense. And again, that 4.6 acres will be the location of that 72-unit, 3-story facility. So scroll on down, you can see the site plan showing the parking and the location of the building, and then petition of the owner. Chuck prepared that, and that's signed, so all that's in order. And then, of course, the ordinance and exhibits. The last exhibit you see is required by law. Exhibit B would be the service plan that states all the services that the city will be required to provide. That's by state law. So, having said all that, all the requirements have been met, and that's ready for adoption. If you guys feel you're ready.
Would you show me where the cap is on there?
It would be, if you go to that map above that, Gretchen, that's about, and then zoom out. This property above, this property right here I'm talking about, that's where the skilled nursing facility, we annexed that property. The cap would be beyond that, just to the north of that dark line, to the north of it. That's where the cap is. So this is all directly south of the cap. First with this block here where the skilled nurse facility, there's a pad out there, and then this facility would be here, and it would line up with the existing 17th Avenue coming out from the high school.
You want to pull up this list?
Please.
You see the cap?
You get the satellite layer on the bottom left corner.
Yeah, zoom on out.
Goes southerly.
Zoom out a little more. And this is the pad I'm talking about with where the skilled nurse facility would be. And if you'll pan on it, scoot it on up to the north, and look just below it, pan on up to, and this is where we're talking about right here. And you can see 17th Avenue. This is what I'm talking about, extending 17th Avenue across. And this property would sit right here.
And show them 18.
18th would extend, right here is 18th, then would extend down to meet with 17th Avenue. Now we're, like as I said, we're gonna annex and construct 17th Avenue at this point. 18th will simply be a dedication on the plat. It'll be dedicated, but won't actually be constructed until needed. This facility with the number of occupants and units doesn't require more than one point of egress.
taking care of the lift station at?
It's gonna be, yeah, good question. They're gonna have a private lift station, a grinder pump, to service. It isn't serviceable by gravity flow. The grinder pump uphill. Then, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, it's gonna be connected in somewhere along.
On the left side. It's where the yellow line is, Danny, on the plat, on that survey, the yellow area on that survey. Isn't that where it's going?
No,
Right there.
not at this point. No, there's been some changes.
Okay.
It's gonna come. It looks like it's gonna come out more straight north and tie into like 13th Street, 13th Avenue, alley about 13th Avenue. That's the plan at this point, and the city will maintain that pressure gravity that force main. But that lift station or grinder pump will be there. That'll be private. There's to maintain.
And that's referred to in the service plan.
Not enough capacity. What lift station number is that? Over.
Yeah, number 2 with
Number
the
2
service.
doesn't have enough capacity, nor can we get it there. Not for the problem.
Okay. Any questions on that one? Entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we adopt ordinance number 1146.
Second. Have a motion second to adopt ordinance number 1146. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I think we'll go ahead. I don't know, was hoping, Joe Shane, I think was only gonna be able to be here for a little bit, but I think we'll go ahead and move to, item number 16, third-party engineer update on drainage review for Crestview Estates. So, Heather, I guess you're gonna present that first.
All right, thank you for having me today. It's my understanding that I'm supposed to give you an overview of my involvement in this process. Is that correct? Okay. So, in October of last year, city manager called and talked to me and let me know that there was a development review that had gotten started, and there were potentially some differing opinions, and I think there was even a thought that, or a question of the, I guess the degree of the review process. Was it too stringent? Was it too loose? You know, and so wanted me to come in and help listen, give any feedback that I had, and just kind of give an impartial third opinion of that process. And so my first, I guess that was the initial conversation. I did receive the drainage review just to look at, and I did an independent analysis before I met with anyone, because I think I had heard at the time that there was a disagreement over how much estimated flow or estimated runoff would be traveling to that development. So I did that. The first meeting that I attended with the group was a required drainage review meeting. This is something that's called out in the criteria, but it's my understanding that was the first of its kind that the city of Canyon had instituted, and it was an effort to put some formality in that process. And so at that meeting, everyone was present. That was on January 11th of this year. I believe you can see that in the timeline. So we started reviewing the proposal, and there was an initial comment about required stormwater routing map through the neighborhood. So that was the first thing that I was asked to go back and review the criteria and give my interpretation on if that should be required or not. And I did provide some guidance and some feedback there. My interpretation was that that routing map wasn't required. However, I did have some other comments from things that I had seen. A lot of that was related to the contributing runoff itself. So when we talk about that routing map, the calculations were submitted that flow would be coming through the fence and then make it internal to the development. And that's the flow that was really in question. So I didn't feel that a routing map was required by the criteria, but I did talk about the requirements based on the criteria to accept the water that's contributing, how it should be analyzed, the legality of where you convey that. And there's been quite a few email responses go back and forth. Mr. Shane did call into question the impact of my involvement in the process related to the development agreement. And then the next meeting that I attended, there had been the second drainage meeting, which I did not attend. But the following meeting I did attend, and this, at that second meeting, I understand that there were comments about how it was difficult to really understand maybe if the model that was used to do the design contained everything it needs to or not without looking at the model itself. And so Mr. Shane offered to host our group at his office and let us look at the model, which was very helpful. So we met at their office and really just wanted to clear up the confusion related to that. And so when we pulled up the model, we were able to determine that a lot of times in these models, it's a black box. There's knobs you can turn and figure out, what needs to be done. But in this particular model, they had set some of the nodes as storage nodes. And so if you think about like a point in space or a channel, if you think about a channel, it's got the upstream end and the downstream end. Okay, well the ends would be the nodes, and the channel itself would be the link in between. Well, the nodes, sometimes if you set those up to where they have the ability to fill with water, what it does is it artificially lowers how much water is actually getting into the channel. So that was happening. One thing we determined at that meeting was that the nodes were holding a lot of the water, and it wasn't actually making it into the conveyance system. So they offered to revise the way that the nodes had been set up. We also talked about the Hydrologic peak flow estimation tool. They'd used the modified rational method, which most Hydrologic flow estimation tools are set up. They were determined empirically, which means someone created a watershed and they came up with an equation that fits it. But when you get outside the parameters of that, they're not valid. And that's pretty widely known. So for the modified rational method, it has an upper limit of a 20-acre watershed size. Our watershed was much larger than that. So the other item that we talked about was revising the method from the modified rational method to the SDS method, which was, it was created just for the situation for this watershed. So a rural, agricultural watershed. It's a perfect application. So when we left that meeting, the action item was to go back and change those two things in the model. And let's see. This summer, there were some conversations with TxDOT. One of my initial comments was that TxDOT, when you go through the process, similar to the city, you have to get your building permit, you go through the development review process. When you go to TxDOT, you go to get a driveway permit. That's their point in the process to where they can get whatever data they need in order to grant you that permit. And I told them that I thought that the drainage needed to be run through them because it was being conveyed to their right-of-way in the ditches adjacent to the roadways. Let's see. I also provided some checklists that we've helped clients with. In my experience, the best development review process is a fast one, a transparent one, something that everyone knows where they stand. And so I think there are some simple tools that can be added to criteria that help communicate and set expectations to all the parties, which I feel like are helpful and we always recommend for clients. Let's see. There was another meeting in July, on July 30th, and we met again at Joe Shane's office and had a really good meeting and worked through the items that needed to be corrected to get this approved. I've included a bullet point list that came from Texie at JSE. They seemed to be really on board with providing that information. And then during that time, I believe the city and the city engineer worked through a process to where they felt comfortable where JSE provided the model and felt like liability was not going to be something that was going to be of a concern. I believe that was the last meeting that I was party to. And so that's the timeline that I can give you, but I'm happy to answer questions related to any of those meetings or just anything in general.
There's a detailed timeline on those events from start to recent in your agenda package. Brian, I hash all that out. It's quite lengthy. At this point, we're at a standstill on this project due to the fact that TxDOT needs to weigh in on the drainage approval. Several commissioners have asked we put this on the agenda to discuss, and so we're here to answer any and all questions that may be wanted.
Joe, can I speak to this?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. If that's
Yes,
actually.
no, that's great.
Let me just say for the benefit of the commission also that Heather Keister is an engineer in the Freeze and Nichols Lubbock office. And she is participating in this drainage review process under the auspices of my office as an expert, because we wanted to make sure that in case there was a legal claim of any kind at any point in this process, that we would have an expert that was up to speed, had attended the meetings, and could express an independent opinion. So that is her involvement. She does not replace our city engineers. Our city engineers have worked on this constantly all the way through it and done a good job, done a very good job. We just wanted to make sure that if there was ever a claim that came up, and in fact we wanted to know if there was an opinion out there that we were applying some arbitrary or unreasonable standard, then we wanted to know that. Okay, and so that's Heather was kind enough to get involved and has been very diligent in attending meetings and keeping up with email threads on this subject, and so we appreciate her involvement. But that's the nature of her involvement here.
And part of that is to help with our process and all.
Absolutely, to improve our process.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Pasnagos, and I'm one of the owners and trying to get Crespi done. One of the issues that we had is that we would, and I think you ended with, you know, Mr. Shane agreed and the others agreed, but we still don't have a drainage. And they would give us 2 questions to answer. We would answer them, and then in the review process, get 8 questions back that didn't have anything to do with the original 2 questions. So it appears from the outside that the city is paying extra. We submitted this in May of 2020, and we still don't have anything. The developers in the area are concerned about trying to do projects in Canyon for this very reason. I think as a taxpayer, I would like to see that we put out an RFQ to get an engineering confirm. We've had brand engineering for forever, and,
Ma'am, let's take Crestview.
Okay, but I do feel like that we have, you know, put forth the effort, and we're not getting, reciprocity from the city. So, I know that, there are property owners who are trying to develop next to us and are waiting to see what happens. So, I know our inventory for lots is very, very low in Canyon, and there's a reason for that. That's all.
May I address a couple of those points? I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid off this wound here. We got a valid drainage model for the first time in the summer of 2021. Okay, meaningful drainage review began when we got a valid model in the summer of 2021. So, I mean, and the city, in my opinion, has kind of gone the extra mile to try to push this thing forward. I've not seen any evidence that any unreasonable or arbitrary standard was applied. I've seen no evidence that the city did anything to derail this project. On the contrary, everybody on staff and on the commission wants this thing to go forward. We just don't want houses out there to flood. It doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't do a builder or a developer any good if you build an expensive house out there and it floods when the first big rain comes. Okay, when the city accepts these public improvements, the public improvements will be owned by the city of Canyon in perpetuity. We'll own it forever. Not too long ago, this commission voted a significant amount of money to repair problems out on Hunsley Road. Okay? That problem could have been avoided if proper measures had been taken to account for and handle the drainage at that time. Okay, we don't want to delay anybody in getting the project moved forward. What we do want to do is make sure that we don't make a huge mistake and subject the citizens and taxpayers of Canyon, Texas to substantial unfunded contingent liabilities in the future. And that's our only objective. That's the real criteria, and that's our only objective. You know, I wish best of luck. I want this to move forward. I totally agree with the speaker that we've got low inventory on buildable lots in Canyon. We want to see that improve, you know, but we don't want flooding to occur interior to the subdivision, and that's really our objective here. Heather, have you, in your work on this project, seen any evidence at all that we're applying some kind of arbitrary or unreasonable standard to the drainage review?
No, and I can speak to that. Stormwater management is really about risk. You lay out the risk you are willing to accept. When you think about FEMA, they've defined the 100-year storm as the level of risk that we want to protect against. And so when you adopt criteria that you regulate to, you are therefore defining the minimum design standards that you are requiring, and what that does is it establishes the level of risk that you as the city of Canyon are willing to accept. And so anything that is above that is higher than minimum. Anything that is below that is in essence asking the city to accept additional risk over and above what is defined in the criteria. So the criteria, I just want to say, are minimum standards.
You know, I really feel that the city and the city commission really are, you know, pro, you know, both development and this development too. I think really want to, you know, I think the input is we want to see things move forward and figure out how to get things done. You know, it does appear to me that there was an issue trying to figure things out to the correct model. Up to that timing, there was issues, and so maybe there was other stuff that happened prior to that, but really an issue, you know, almost a timeline began then with figuring out what that correct model is. Is that?
That's correct. Also, when I talked about the checklist that I think could be helpful, sometimes I feel like the best thing is to establish, okay, when are we gonna consider the submittal to be complete so that we can start the clock? So that everyone knows day number 1, and then you can set an expectation of how long is appropriate for the city to take to review a submittal. So when you communicate, here's when the clock starts and here's when you can expect to receive comments, to me that just going into a situation makes everything a lot easier, and everyone can plan around that. Now if you have comments you have to respond to, then there's time windows that go alongside that. But I think that that's definitely one piece. I do believe getting access to the model was a key part of this process, because there were several rounds when we did visit and we knew something was wrong, but we couldn't figure out what without seeing the model. In absence of the model, all you have are the printouts and you have numbers, but they don't always make sense. And so that's why getting access to the model was a pretty important part of this.
Heather, by model, you mean the computer generated
The computer model,
of
yes.
how the drainage is gonna work?
That's correct. And one thing, we've rewritten criteria for people in this region, and so the last time criteria was written, technology wasn't what it is today. So there's nothing in criteria that requires you to submit a model, because at that time you would print out cards, or things were drawn in CAD in much greater detail. Now it is common to have models submitted just because it helps expedite reviews.
We've done that in the past, correct? We've received models in the past for other developments.
But I want the commission to know that from my observation, and I've been watching this and been copied on email threads since it started, there is nobody that's against this development. Nobody is against this development. Connected to the city of Kenyon, I have not encountered one person in my work with the city that's against this development. We would all like to see it succeed and do well.
We've been planning for Section 3 track to go. That's what we did, the lift station on the golf course, planned for Madison Park and Section 3 in terms of capital expenditures. So.
In fact, we've gone forward and spent money, authorized, spent money to advance the project without a signed development agreement.
So it sounds like to me the TxDOT piece is a key piece right now.
It's the linchpin, I think.
And I know Dan and I personally reached out to TxDOT to get some concurrence and some discussion related to TxDOT and their willingness to do such. Because we had been told on our last communications that they were going to try to do a culvert right now by Hunsley. And so Dan and I asked the district engineer, hey, if obviously it's going to increase above their profile, they have a specific that you can't exceed this much CFS, and we were asking TxDOT personally, hey, if they were to do some improvements into the ditch and do some of these things, where would you feel about that? Would you have some leniency to allow that if they improve part of that ditch to take in that excess stormwater coming off? So Dan and I have been in active conversations about that and are trying to feel that out as well. And that's
So we had another engineering firm look at this and give us some guidance. And they said that typically you do not go to TxDOT until the city has approved it. And that's very highly unusual. And that they may not even look at it until the city approves it. So we're kind of in a spot where you're telling us that TxDOT has to approve it, and they're telling,
May I ask a question? Because I'm not an engineer, don't do math very well, that's why I'm a lawyer. So, if you get all your improvements constructed and built on the assumption that TxDOT will approve the discharge into the right-of-way, and they don't, what happens then?
I'm
just telling you what they told us, is that
Right.
TxDOT won't look at it till the city approves it, and the city won't approve it till TxDOT. So what are we supposed to do?
Well, it appears to me that you will have spent a significant amount of money building improvements that do not serve your development well.
Heather, can you comment on that? I mean.
I can. The TxDOT involvement is difficult because their stance has changed, to be honest. If you think about decades ago, TxDOT had kind of the reputation of putting on their blinders and we're just going to consider drainage in our right-of-way. And then, there were drainage issues. And so then the pendulum swung to where if you think about TxDOT facilities that go through cities, they came back and said, okay, we're going to pay to size this according to the city's criteria, okay? Well, as TxDOT's funds have been limited, just like everyone else's, the pendulum swings back and it's, we're going to pay for this part and the city's going to pay for this part. And so that's not been a constant over time. I think with stormwater management in general, the goal is as we know better, we do better. And so you'll see changing regulations over time, and that's the reason for it. Everyone knows that flood damage is costly. They're trying to design appropriately to avoid having damage, but still providing, especially in a volume-based system like we have. I mean, you guys count on your ditches, your playas, those are all volume. Volume is finite. And so excavation of that is costly. And so I think there's just a push and pull between cities and TxDOT in terms of who's going to own what. In terms of the timing of that, you guys know in your city processes you have certain points where you can ask for things from people. Okay, the building permit process is really the last piece. Once you grant that, chances of you receiving anything from anyone else are very slim. Well, in TxDOT's world, a driveway permit is a similar example of that. And so I can't speak to the timing of it. They may be talking about what's customary. Typically, you get this through the city, and then you go to get a driveway permit. And that may be what they were referencing.
Yeah, you speak to some of that.
Yes.
So, leading up to that whole TxDOT deal, we got the model, like Chuck said, in September. That's when we started reviewing it. We made some comments. We were going back and forth. In July, before we had our meeting with Mr. Shane, we had discussed how we were going to improve the drainage review process and make it more open, have better communication. So, like Heather said, the meeting went well. We thought everything went good. We got the model, reviewed it, had some comments. One of our comments was, has TxDOT reviewed it? And that was because, like Heather had specified, TxDOT has changed. They now make it real strict, and they're like, hey, make sure if you're going to put runoff on our right-of-way, that you follow this guideline. And they give you a guideline. I think it's one of these attachments here. So we were, like Chuck said, I don't want this to go through, and then ultimately you end up spending a whole bunch of money for development that TxDOT won't let you have a driveway to. So we made that comment. We got the second review. We started reviewing it. Our comments were mostly disregarded. We were like, okay, well, let's try again. Mentioned the TxDOT deal again. We were talking back and forth on the phone, and we got to thinking, well, who's going to pay for these improvements to TxDOT right away? Down to we don't know yet.
And
so,
one clarification. This was more than just a driveway. There was going to be a bigger culvert put under Hunsley that already exists, but would be larger, enhanced in order to accommodate the runoff.
Right, and the bar ditches would have to be improved. So there'd be it's a substantial improvement to the TxDOT infrastructure. So we were just trying to be helpful. Our new role was, let's get it going. We're trying to be helpful, say, hey, look out for this, it's going to be a problem. When we get the second submission, it wasn't really addressed. We talked to the City of Amarillo and said, hey, when do you guys get TxDOT involved? Because I can foresee a big problem here. The city engineer, Matt Thomas, actually came to our office. We spoke in person. He shared the same concerns. He says in Amarillo, they send out a checklist, and everybody, it's disbursement to everybody that's involved, and then if TxDOT reviews it and they check it, that they approve it, that's part of their process. So we felt comfortable, okay, we're going to reach out to TxDOT, and so that's what we did. TD from our office called Clint Harms, the TxDOT engineer who reviewed it, and he had his concerns of saying that this development was going to need on-site detention. And so 2 submissions we had received since that textile review did not have that. And so that made it clear to me that even if we approved it the way it was, you can end up with a development that textile would not approve. So I made the decision that day. I called Joe Price and said, hey, I don't feel comfortable reviewing and spending any more taxpayer money on a development that we're going to have to start over on. You know, we've already done above and beyond, and I don't see this getting past TxDOT. Let's have TxDOT approve it first, and if it's all good, then we'll finish it out, because, you know.
Communications with TxDOT, with the plant who does most of this over there, he did indicate that it was mentioned about some detainage of the water.
Yeah. And that was, what was the date? It was in May?
There were 2 meetings.
I thought they submitted it, you're saying they submitted it in September.
They submitted their model after they revised and used a proper method in September. But before they did all that, they had already spoken with TxDOT. TxDOT told them, hey, you're going to have on-site detention. So after they knew that, our submission did not include on-site detention. We were concerned, okay, well, this probably isn't going to go through. So that's why I decided to stop on the review. And that was my main concern. Was I don't want to start this over, because then we get comments like, well, it's expensive, it is expensive, it is time consuming. I don't want to keep doing it. I'd like to review it and get it all through. So if TxDOT comes back and says, yeah, that's great, we'll put this culvert in, improve the ditches, and we're good to go, then we'll approve it on our end. You know, we still have a couple of comments that need to be addressed, and that's all we're asking for, is just make sure TxDOT's going to say, okay, go.
Do we have a time frame on this, like TxDOT can get back to us?
I think TxDOT is waiting on them to resubmit and address their concerns.
Which I think was what we were under the impression, that the developing engineer was in conversation with
Yes,
TxDOT.
they said they're in communication, so I don't know what the timeline is. I just know they're supposedly in communication to get that process.
So am I hearing that, excuse me, may I speak?
Yeah, or I may ask the same question, Chuck.
Go ahead.
Adolfo and Heather, are you all saying that you believe that where we're at right now in the modeling and all is far enough along that TxDOT will take a look at it and give some input there?
I think right now would be a good time to get that done, because if you say, here's what it's going to look like, TxDOT can review it and say yes or no. So.
But I guess what here Pussy, she's saying they won't take a look at it yet, but we
No, they
believe they
can.
would to give that input? Or?
I think they would. Like I said, it was already submitted to them once before.
But we think they won't. I mean, we've been told that they won't.
They already reviewed it once a few months ago, so I'm sure they'll review it again.
Yeah, they did, I believe, have some conversations. I think Mr. Shane went and met with him sometime early in the year. And that's when I guess the first mention of the detainage was mentioned sometime early summer in that regard.
So what triggers this, the application for the driveway permit, triggers TxDOT review?
Yes, which is
In this
very
case-
far in the process.
In this case, there's an improvement to a main culvert under a section line road.
Yes.
Right.
Diagonally across Huntley and VFW, and that's pretty substantial. And since we don't know who the party that's going to pay for it is, and we don't know if that's going to be approved, we don't want to get to the stage of applying for a driveway permit and then you start over and you're already planning to, you're probably already putting in utilities and cutting out roads. So we're trying to be proactive and say, hey, think of this ahead of time. So.
The criteria manual calls for major and minor conveyance to be designed using the appropriate methods that are in the criteria. So this channel and culvert improvements in the TxDOT right-of-way would be major conveyance that needs to be reviewed by TxDOT.
And that should be before a driveway permit.
Correct.
So there is credence that they should approve this prior to waiting till the driveway.
So I think, and also I think the city commission would be interested to know, have we, done things, to go through and be proactive to suggest that, some thoughts that things should be done, or so, or we, as we work it through the process.
I mean, do you think our process is being up to par, or are we being overly strict? I feel on our end, you know, our promise to you guys was we were gonna work with the engineers and try to communicate better, and I feel like we've done that. And I don't know if you feel like that's enough or too much, but that's, I think we're doing what we're supposed to be.
From my perspective, city engineer, city staff have been very available to the applicant, to the point where when you're trying to build this timeline, it's difficult to separate these into separate submittals. So that, to me, communicates, you know, a desire to be a partner, you know. If you think about everyone's, I don't know that we've really hit on this, but the initial concern, it's a unique layout for a subdivision. The flow coming onto the property, there are some agricultural berms that were assumed to take that flow around. There was flow assumed to come through, and it was calculated, like how much flow could come between the pickets. And so one of my questions was, okay, what happens when it gets past the pickets? Because there's no conveyance, so we're not following the minor and major conveyance rule. We don't have a design for that. The flow was not accounted for in those city streets. And so the first question was related to the calculation of how the water came onto the subdivision. And so that was one conversation. And then when we started talking about that, we started talking about, well, are we required to accept it, or can that flow be diverted around the subdivision? And that's really when TxDOT came into the equation. So the criteria clearly says you're required to accept that runoff. If you're going to change the nature of flow, then that really, you're going to concentrate that flow. It needs to be contained and conveyed in a place that you have the legal right to put it there, which means right of way or an easement. You don't have the legal right to concentrate flow on someone's private property, and so that's where we started talking about the need for easements. Once we started talking about that, then we got to looking at the model of what does the flow look like at various parts in the subdivision. That's when we figured out that there was something wrong that we needed to investigate further. So I can easily explain how, you know, the conversation progressed. In my opinion, the questions were all questions that the city should have for a subdivision, for public improvements that they're going to accept. So I felt it was appropriate.
Well, can I ask you, pardon my ignorance, but what is it about what the city's asking you guys to do that you just can't accept?
Well, the thing that sticks in my crow the most is that our first submission was in May, 18 months ago. And when we ask, and when we meet, they'll say, yeah, we don't like that. But they won't tell us exactly what they need. So it's like, yeah, you're going to have to go back and rework that. But they don't tell you what's wrong with it.
When you say they, who are you talking about?
This brand.
Can I say about that real quick? I'm not the design engineer, so I can't really tell you how to design it, so I need the engineer to tell me how he's going to make it work. So we're limited on what we can, our comments.
So what we are doing is we are spending exorbitant amounts of money going back and forth to get this thing approved. And it's still not approved. And we have answered their questions. And when we submit our answers, then they just give us a slew of questions back. And every time they're billing the city to review.
Well, that cost has been driven largely by the design engineer.
I disagree with that.
It's been driven
and
quite
Chuck,
a bit by the
we
design
can argue,
engineer.
we can debate that, but the point is, we're spending a large amount of money. We want this done, and if we can't get it, we're just going to pull it.
Well, we want it done too. We're trying to figure out how to do that.
But you don't act like you want it done because you're not working with us. You're just telling us it's wrong, and you're not telling us with
I don't believe that to be the case. Who told you that?
These folks.
Now,
Grants.
who told
Grants
you that
Engineering.
we're not giving you answers?
I sat in on the meeting, and they're like, yeah, that's not right.
Which meeting?
I've sat in on several of those meetings.
Drainage meetings we got.
Well, Heather was saying, like, having a timeline and having, that's what we need to
And by law, you're supposed to have a timeline, and you haven't met it.
Nor do we have a development agreement.
But I'm not gonna sign a development agreement and agree to all these things, knowing that I'm gonna, if you have to keep spending money on engineering fees, I can't afford to do this project.
How many drainage approvals have we done since this started? So we've approved several other developments since then.
And how many of them were done by Brown?
All of them.
That's like the approval.
The approval, they've approved
Yeah.
numerous ones since we started y'all's project.
I think there's maybe a conflict.
What is it?
No, we didn't design them, we just approved them.
Did no design, it's only on
Yeah.
approval side. What did they approve? We've done 2 ETJs, we're working on, where we at on Hunters 2?
It's approved.
Approved.
Locust Spring Canyon.
We've got Spring Canyon, next unit. We've got also major commercial property on I-27, has that been approved? Yep, they're doing their drain structures over.
We don't have any issues with the other ones. It's always been pretty smooth sailing. The last few months, we've been getting real good feedback from the other design engineers that everything's going smoothly. They like the communication, so.
Can I speak something to answer that lady where she said that when she answers one that she's getting multiple?
It's up to Mayor TD. Yep.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Steve.
Can you explain your role, TD?
Yes, my name is T.D. Pierce, I'm branch engineers, and I've been the one reviewing the drainage proposals that we've been getting, and of course, Adolfo oversees my work. So, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. The lady said that she'll answer one question and we'll get multiple questions back. So when we started, I'm just going to give you one example. The berms to the west of the property.
On Rock Roses.
On Rock Roses property. Initially, they modeled it that water is all the way conveyed through those berms and nothing comes into the property. And then we asked, okay, well, show us the conveyance capacities of the berms and how much is coming into it. And now they're saying the berm is not conveying everything and it's coming in. So now we have to look at other things downstream. So that's the kind of things that we have to deal with when we ask a question and we see another problem. And of course we're going to have to ask questions. We can't just ignore the water that's coming in. We've had the same issue with the pond north of Country Club Road. And then they also had an issue with the easement on the north side of the property, which Heather mentioned that they wanted to put pickets with 8/10 of a distance apart. Like, how are you going to maintain that? How are you going to specify that? There is nothing there. So when we ask more questions about it, then they change the design. So obviously we're going to have to ask more questions. We understand the design. So I understand from your perspective, from a layman's perspective, in looking at it, you give the answer and you get different questions back. But from our point of view, we need to make sure the runoff is addressed. From point A to point B, we need to make sure it works, and that's why we ask those questions. It's not that we have some nefarious purpose. And we're doing this with everybody, it's not just you. And like before that there are several other developments that have gone through. So I'm not sure what else to say other than we're sorry that your project is not going forward, but it's not on our end that would help.
To add to that, some of the reviews we've done, the ponds that he mentioned north of Country Club next to D Lane, it was modeled incorrectly. We took the time to model it ourselves and look at and gave them 3 options. You can model it this way, you can do a pond factor, and just said, hey, you can do it this way. We spoke with them on the phone and said, here's your options. You do one of these, you're good. And then we get the resubmittal, and all that was disregarded. So that, I agree, it adds cost to the city. We did it to help get it through, and then it got disregarded, so then all that was for nothing. And what we're doing is designing by review, and ultimately it ends up being our design on that. That's not really the way it needs to go. So I can't say, here's exactly what you did wrong, here's how you do it every step of the way, because at that point it's my design. And that's not how it works. I need the design engineer to come in and say, here's the development, here's how it works, here's my calculations, and then we just look at it and it goes through. That's how all the other developments go. I can't sit there and say, you got to fix this piece and here's how you do it, fix this piece and here's how you do it. All we can do is say, here's my comment, how's this going to work? You say you're doing this, prove to me that that's actually the case, and then we move forward. That's there's nothing.
Can I ask a
about-
clarification?
Yes.
Sometimes, we get into another drainage reviews where there's a disagreement. Sometimes. And in those processes, what do typically another design engineer do to prove up their point, other than disagree?
They provide empirical data. They provide, peer review publications. So
Yeah.
it depends.
So how's
Or
that
they'll give their
different?
calculations, say, hey,
Yeah.
here's how that actually works. And, you've seen it before, somebody does it, and we might disagree, but it meets the criteria.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, it meets, so we can't really say anything else. Even if I
Right.
disagree with it, it's good to go, and then we'll have, may or may not have an issue, but that's the way it goes, and so they just have to provide their evidence that that's actually
And
the
it
case.
has to be published every single, it can't be anecdotal. Oh, I did this 20 years ago, now it doesn't, it still works. That's not gonna work. We need publications. Like Spring Canyon, for example, when they did that outfall this size to rock, we were not completely happy with that design.
On
but,
outfall one, that we're having to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. But they provided HEC 11 from the Corps of Engineers, and they seem to follow the minimum standards. We're not happy with it, but we approved it.
Even though it has failed.
Exactly.
They still met minimum standards, and that's correct.
Yes, that's correct. And with Crestview, we've actually helped in some of the review comments. I say, okay, you're using the SSA model. Go to this page in the user's manual, and this will tell you what you're doing. I've done that on multiple locations too. It's not that we're just, they're like, okay, well, you figure it out. We've gone over it to help more than we've done to any other developer, because it's something that the city wants to get through, and it's been in the works for a while. We want to be done with it too.
To be honest with you,
Like you're saying here, there's been several references to the criteria. There's an industry standard, peer-reviewed industry standard that's applicable here, is that correct?
Yes.
And are we following that industry standard?
not always,
Okay.
the design engineers don't always.
But in the review, do you try to follow the industry standard?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
An example would be, if your development is going to have a certain type of grass, you use a certain factor saying, here's what it's going to do. You can't say, well, I've done this 50 years and I always use this other number and it always works. That's not how it works. Use the information on the table provided by, federal references sometimes. The federal government says use this, and so things like that, we say use what's been proven, use what the government has had, the Army Corps of Engineers, whoever has been doing it forever, they know what they're doing, use that source. I don't want to use anecdotal sources, so.
Well, there's some, do we use the one from 50 years ago, or do we use the one from 1990? So there is some discrepancy in some of that in what we use.
I'm not really sure what you're referring to.
Well,
But
there's
sometimes when
several-
something's up to interpretation, there's been cases where something like that does arise and we go through it. I don't know
Like
specific case like that, but.
hypothetically, the stormwater manual for Amarillo came out in 1998. So it's 22, 23, 24 years old. We're using that, but obviously there are some things that have come out in the last 20 plus years that may be newer concepts that don't even get mentioned in that manual due to age.
Right.
And to answer, can I?
How are y'all taking that under consideration on those things?
Okay, so I'll give you an example. Text drought rainfall intensities. That, if you're using the Amarillo stormwater criteria manual, the 100-year is going to be like a 5.7. But right now, if you look at it, it's like a 5.9. So whenever we design something, when we look at it, when we review something, we're like, hey, you're not using their updated coefficients. But if they come back and say, well, it's in the manual, then that's it. We can't say anything further. But some engineers actually do change it because, their name is on the plan, so they actually care about it. And some people change that, but some people don't.
Yeah, so like, good practice would be use updated data, but if the manual allows for it, then you can use that too. But, you can do that to help your case, I guess, if you're trying to minimize runoff. But there's always updated resources you can use, and that's what we always recommend.
Yes.
Use the updated rainfall data if you want it to be up to date, or just updated sources.
It sounds like to me, part of the communication, we've got to be able to see and thoroughly understand the model early on. That seems to me to be a big part of the issue on this one. I mean, is that moving forward, is that a piece that?
Yeah, and
I think that's part of it. I think you can set the stage for the submittal in general, that when it's Before the time clock starts, you have everything you're going to need to do a thorough review, which prevents additive comments throughout the review. And when you, as an applicant, go in knowing that, I think you automatically have a little bit more sense of calm that just helps the conversation in the event that there are things to work through. I think there's some easy process improvements that really make this a lot easier.
Was this not all based upon the model issue? Is the major issue here the model?
No, it wasn't just that. It was the handling of the runoff through the subdivision. And the more we got into it, the more that we saw.
Right.
And it really, I mean, remember those choose your own adventure books? You know, you select one outcome, you may get a short path, and you select another, and you may get a longer path. And that's essentially what happens here.
Yeah, we're talking about big changes. It's talking about like over 50 CFS of runoff coming on site difference that the model was showing disappearing. That it's not. We're not talking about a raindrop here. It's significant changes that make a difference. So
This 50 CFS, visualize it for us. What does that mean?
just about like 40-something thousand gallons a minute.
So a street will typically carry, you know, residential street will typically carry 20 to 40. So the entire capacity of a street is the delta, which is the difference between flow staying in the street or flow being in someone's house.
So ultimately, it was just modeled incorrectly. It was shown incorrectly. So we can't just allow it because it's just wrong. It would be different if it was a difference of opinion. It was modeled incorrectly. So that's all there is to it, and that still hasn't been addressed yet. So.
I have a question because I don't know what you guys do day to day, but so criteria, when you talk about projects like this, like how many criteria are there? Like hundreds or like 10 or like?
Well, we have, you know, Canyon uses the Amarillo, the stormwater criteria, and so like that's a guide on how to do this, and that's the Amarillo one. But then a lot of the data that's in there, there's all these sources that are, you know, from
So it's
empirical
like
models.
pages and stuff?
Yeah, it's a binder.
The first half is let's estimate how much flow we're going to have to handle, and the second half is how are we going to move it through the development.
Yeah.
So it's kind of those two pieces, and depending on the design decisions you make, you have to design enough conveyance to handle whatever that flow is.
You know, and so if somebody follows that manual, and they follow and use the data in that manual, then they're good to go. It's when they use incorrect data or make up their own data, or just, you know, like she said, there's limits on it. It's rational method or modified rational says 20 acres, but we're talking about 200 acres here. There's a tenfold difference. So you can't use a certain method to evaluate this. You have to use the correct method. So we had that problem from the beginning, and it's just, if you follow the criteria manual, you're good to go, but it hasn't been followed, and it hasn't been done properly. It's just, but we keep talking about difference of opinion here. That's not the case here. It's not modeled properly.
So in the real world, what we're worried about is if you got hypothetically 361 CFS coming into the north end of the subdivision, and you're showing 125 coming out the south end, what happened to the water in the middle?
That's correct.
Because in the real world, it doesn't really just go away.
That's correct.
It goes somewhere.
Yes, sir.
Would you have been able to see that had you not looked at the model? Can you see that in the drainage report?
There was red flags that something was going on,
Yeah.
but until we got the model, we couldn't pinpoint what the problem was.
So-
it was basically like he said, there's so much coming in, so much coming out, so we knew something was going on.
The report, the written report with the tables in the back, wouldn't have showed or highlighted?
No, it did. It just takes a lot of time. That's why our first reviews took a lot of time, because it's just tables of tables of tables. And in fact,
Big-
one of the
big tables.
Yeah, it's like a spreadsheet.
One of the comments from TxDOT itself was that Clint could not find how much runoff is coming into the street because the report was so convoluted. And
Clint from TxDOT.
Clint comes from TxDOT. Yeah, it's in that email thread that I forwarded you. And that's why the model is important, because without it, it's just a maze of data.
And the time is important, then providing the model makes all the difference.
Yeah.
Well, we probably need to wrap this portion up. Commissioners, do you all have any other questions to ask while we're?
Joe, Kelsey and Randy, I'd love for you to do the comment. I'd love to take you out to the site, and I can show you that site. Explain everything to you, it'd be a lot easier to show it all to you, you can tell what's going on.
I want to caution the commission at this time about walking quorums, quorum of the body getting together.
I'll take one at a time, if y'all want to.
Well, where is Joe? Why did he leave?
Oh,
He had a funeral that one of his close friends passed away, so we would have.
Anyway, so if y'all got time.
I don't think it'd do me any good. I mean, I'm hearing from engineers.
But you haven't heard from our engineer, Randy.
Well, you've got us, you got Friesen Nichols, and you have TxDOT, and they're all.
You don't have TxDOT.
Well, TxDOT reviewed it, and they didn't approve it.
You haven't heard from Randy, you haven't heard from Joe. And it would be interesting to get his point of view, because I feel like we've been raked over the coals as far as our project.
Well, I've been copied on numerous email threads where we've
But
been
you
in
haven't
contact
been
with
sitting in
Joe.
on our meetings.
And, city officials have met with Joe. We're available to meet with Joe if he wants to meet. I mean, there's not an issue meeting or hearing his input or moving this thing forward. We're more than happy to. You know, we want to move it.
Yeah, we all wanna move it forward. I don't care who's to blame for anything in the past, let's go forward.
That's right.
Figure
We
out
just
what
don't
we
want
can do.
homeowners out there to flood when this thing builds out.
I'm just gonna ask, why is it such a big deal to do what these guys are asking y'all to do? Because we want you to do it.
Well, we've been trying, Randy, and we haven't gotten anywhere.
But they're saying this is all you need to do, and we'll go.
If you listen to Heather, she said at our last meeting, they agreed and we agreed and we still don't.
We never received what we
They
asked
agreed to
for.
provide certain information.
And I think we've done that.
No, they haven't.
With the exception of the text number.
No.
And when we met with our other.
It just feels to me like our guys are saying, this is what y'all need to do, and y'all say, we don't like that.
No,
But-
it's not that we don't like it. It's that we've tried to accommodate for their questions, and we're just not getting anywhere.
Were you aware that TxDOT recommended on-site detention pond?
Was I aware of that?
Yes, ma'am.
I read it in the information.
Okay. Has that design change been incorporated into your plans?
That's a question for Joe.
Okay.
Well, I'm disappointed that he wasn't here, I mean, I don't like that. It means to
Time
me,
didn't work
that-
out, we tried to get it moved up.
well, not on our part, I just mean like on
Right.
his part.
We've received 2 models since the meeting with TxDOT in late July, and neither of them showed any on-site detention. And that was the biggest red flag for us, which is why we
So,
called you.
that answers that question.
Also, did Heather not say this is like?
So I'm just gonna ask this, so, if they could adjust, why can't you,
It was
what's the big
divided.
deal about putting some retention ponds so we can get forward on this?
Well, that's a question for Joe.
I can tell you part of the conversation I was privy to, we did talk about detention and we talked about conveyance. And when I was referencing where you have a legal right to concentrate flow, there were iterations where, one of the alternatives was to concentrate the flow just to the north of the property line of the subdivision and just not accept it, divert it around. And that's someone else's property. There's no easement, there's no right of way, that's not legal. And so we did talk somewhat about how do you get the runoff that's contributing to a level that the conveyance can take it. So from that aspect, I do feel we talked about the topic of detention, because we talked about having multiple entry points into the subdivision and having small drainage easements. If you didn't want to give up a whole lot for detention, just put small drainage easements on a property line between 2 homes, have that water come in and carry it through the street and then back out. So that was one of the recommendations to try to get around this issue that we made during the process.
And again, why can't we do that?
Well, I have to give it to Joe. I mean, I can't answer engineering questions.
Well, everyone in this room wants this to happen.
No, it sounds like there's a bug of criteria it needs to meet. I don't understand why it can't meet that criteria. It shouldn't be that difficult. Y'all are doing it all day, every day. Just make it work.
We've been trying.
You know what, and that's probably is a good lead in. We do need to probably move forward, and appreciate everybody's time this evening. Thanks for coming up, Heather, and
Sure.
Appreciate your input too. The next item that we want to address, I think, helps address some of that too. So let's go ahead. Thank you all, and let's move on to item number 15, which is to consider and take appropriate action on Canyon Randall Drainage Criteria Manual Report. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, kind of what we've been talking about, trying to do better every day we can. And one of the recommendations coming out through the last several drainage reviews, not just this one we discussed, is possibly doing our own stormwater manual. We have tugs and tugs at Amarillo to update theirs, and it's a running joke now that they have told us time and time again that they're going to get to it. I don't think, it doesn't seem to be going to happen in my generation. And so I think one of the solutions coming out, asking ourselves, and one of the things that I asked Heather to, come in and stipulate as, I want us to be reviewed by a third party to see how we can do better and how we as an organization can do better. And so, really this has really taken off since 2012. This has really just taken off since then. We've not really had to deal with this as much since that time. And that's the inception of Canyon East. Well, things changed even since 2012. That's almost 10 years ago. But highlighted in Agenda 15 is the big piece of what drainage is all about. And it's right there in the middle. It's all about the willing to accept the risk. But coming back to it, we're visiting with Grant and visiting with Friesen Nichols. We feel that having a drainage manual, because there are some ambivalence in parts of Amarillo Stormwater Manual due to its age and such. One of the things that's constantly criticized on development in Amarillo has their own drainage utility. And so it allows that those drainage utility dollars can be given back when funds are available. Well, funds are never available. They're 20 years out to even get that. So that's a constant debate in their manual. Some of Adolfo mentioned the grass CN numbers. Some of those things are open, really open-ended. And so coming out of discussions of how do we get better? How can we get better? This is what we think would be an ideal time to work on our own manual. And also, one of the things would be to assist staff create checklists of completeness for drainage reports, accountability timelines on ourselves, and just moving things forward in the right manner. But data here is highlighted kind of what that is. I've updated the updated manual and basically some internal accountability timelines and stuff. There's no doubt we can do better on that. We all take the adventure of, we can always improve every day. And we do. We try to. We've gotten a lot better since 2012. There's no doubt about it.
Adolfo, or is there any input there?
So I think improving the manual, like Kelsey said, having that manual is real important because that's your go-to guide on how to do it. Updating it, getting rid of anything that's, I think it says this, or I think it says that. Just clear it up. There's stuff that comes up specific to this region that, for this retention ponds, they're not fully spelled out in the manual. We want to be able to say, hey, these are a thing, here's how you model it. Stuff like that's real important, and that's where things get hung up on in these reviews is stuff like that. If we just clear it up, it would make the process go a lot smoother and faster. And then in the whole process, and for Heather's recommendation too, is we involve all the other engineers and to get their opinion on it as well, since they're going to be the ones using it and doing the designs off of it, and have everybody involved and get their input, so we have a manual that everybody agrees on, and that way we don't have to worry about difference of opinion. It's just here it is, follow the manual, and you're good. And I think that's what we strive to do with the new manual. It'll be a whole lot easier. So that's kind of what the purpose of that manual would be, just to update all the info. So one, you have accurate, up-to-date data, because rainfall is getting worse over time. You want to update to that. And also there's software in that criteria manual that they ask to use called ASAP that runs on DOS that you have to get a special application that will run DOS on a computer nowadays to run that, but we want to update it so that we're not using software that's older than half the people using it. So things like that I think are real important to just be up to date and have a reliable source.
I think the things that I'd like to add are typically when criteria has reached the end of its useful life, you have situations like we have with Crestview. The tool doesn't meet the needs anymore. So to me, that's one of the big signs. And so it's time to get criteria in place that works for the city of Canyon and Randall County. There was some confusion in the very first meeting I attended between, is this in the Amarillo manual or is this in the ordinances for Randall County? So I think getting alignment in that will help you regulate your development at the appropriate level and help things get through the process quickly. There are things like the ASAP model that I completely agree. That model was developed, basically calibrated peak water surface elevations in playa lakes. It is not set up to be able to change as the watershed develops. So it's not correctly predicting water surface elevations. That's something that needs to go. And so I was able to, you guys benefited. We were part of the team that reviewed Amarillo's criteria, and we have a detailed list of here's the updates that are needed to that manual. Provided that to the city of Canyon because there are some areas where the city of Amarillo does know that their criteria needs to be updated and strengthened.
And Randall County has shown a very big interest. Randall County, so in Amarillo's ETJ, Amarillo runs lead on their manual, but Randall County, when it's in rural, basically is using the same thing as we are, and they're running into several of the same issues that we've discussed today. In my several conversations with Judge Dyer and Dr. Bob, Commissioner Dr. Bob, they're running into the same issues, and they have, every conversation we've had, they've had a very big push to possibly doing this together, and I think there's potential to do that, including some of the engineers that we're talking about today.
When I first started my career, I reviewed, there were some plans for cities in our region that on the plans it wrote that basically we design assuming it doesn't rain very often in West Texas. Okay, well that's a level of risk you're willing to accept. Now the level of risk is more stringent than it used to be, but there's also a lot of technology that's available. There's a lot of tools that can make this easy, and so I think having clear criteria and checklists and good processes in place makes this process easier for people to use and get their developments through. And I think that's the goal for the city.
Timing of this project, if it were approved by the commission, how long do you think it would take?
Well, you shut down my time.
I sure can. The criteria updates themselves can be done in probably 6 months. To me, it's important, especially when you have people who are having a tough time with this development process right now. It's important to take them through the process and make sure they are on board with the changes, because if they come in and write criteria and developer engineers are not on board, that's not going to serve you well either. And so there's a process, we can lay out technically this is what needs to be done. If it's higher, a higher standard or a lower risk than the city feels is appropriate to accept, it's in their purview to change it. And oftentimes when we go through this process, we recommend things and then we have people push back and say, no, we do this for a living, we know that this works. And so what you find is you've got people with varying interests and varying perspectives, and everyone kind of, I don't want to say compromises, but somewhat. We go in with a start and we tweak it until the group is comfortable, and that's the final criteria that gets approved.
So you got a peer review consensus?
That's right.
Consensus, right.
Has Friesen Nichols done this before?
Yes, many times.
So you have
We feel that the public and the stakeholder communication is a very important part of the process.
You personally have experience doing
I
it?
do, yes. I rewrote Lubbock's manual a couple years ago using this process.
I think West State's moving, we need this. provided that we have a county on board.
Yeah, they have, I think I visited with them that I was bringing this agenda item to get your blessing before I started discussions with, I was hoping 50-50 match share. The cost is around 110 for this project, and it would be a 55-55 match between each other. All of the conversations leading up to this have been positive that they would be, and so if I wanted to make sure y'all were on board with this project before we pursued any further.
I make a motion.
A second.
Have a motion and a second, and that is to move forward with the drainage criteria manual with cooperation with Randall County.
If they don't want to cooperate, I'll bring it back to the body for discussion. Or we may have to wait until the end of the budget year.
Any further discussion on the commission's part? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand. All opposed, like sign. Motion passes 3-1. All right. Well, thank you. I know that was a lot of discussion. I appreciate we probably did dig into the weeds, but I think just timing and because there is a lot of interest to see things move forward, I appreciate everybody's participation and being here this evening. Okay, we will go ahead and move forward with the agenda here then, and I think, Joel, I believe that takes us to you and item number 10, to consider and take appropriate action on September 30th, 2021 financial report by Finance Director Joel Wright.
Oh, tap it or something. I want to give you a preliminary look at financial statements as of September 30, 2021. I say preliminary because the audit process will be taking this to a full accrual basis so that the financial statements can be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles for the audit. But as this is presented to you, this is basically on the budget basis, kind of what we track throughout the year. With the exception of at the end of the year, I've made several accruals for expenditures that we incurred but not yet paid for as of September 30. So these financials do include that, and those would be budgeted expenses. First of all, general fund, we ended the year with cash at $4.4 million, and we'll defer that to the investment report where I'll discuss the cash balances in detail. That's the next agenda item. As of September 30, we have accounts payable accrued at $533,000. We have due to other funds of $2.1 million. The majority of this is the ARPA funds that we received from the federal government. We're going to propose that we transfer that to the CIP fund that we created this past year. And transfer those funds over there to be used for infrastructure projects to be determined. That's an agenda item a little bit later as well. On the schedule of revenues and expenditures for the general fund, we ended the year with $13.1 million in total revenues, $3 million property taxes, $2.9 million in sales taxes, and like I usually do, I've given you the supporting schedule there on sales taxes. You can see how that's increased over the last few years. Total expenditures, $11.6 million. You will notice there on the sanitation line item that we were over budget on that. This is because we had some invoices come in after I did my initial analysis and brought amendments to you about 6 weeks ago. We need to go back and re-amend the budget for some of these items. That's agenda item number 11, so we'll deal with that here in a minute. We've also accrued an additional transfer from the utility fund of about $60,000, so we'll need to amend for that as well. But overall, we ended the year with that additional internal transfer of just under 5,000 net increase in the general fund, so we're about even on that. On the debt service fund, again, this is property taxes that we collect for servicing the 2016 series bonds on CAP. We ended the year at $327,900. And again, if you remember, that was factored into our calculation of our tax rate for this current fiscal year, and what we can collect in property taxes for that debt service. So we'll be using that cash balance up as we service the debt going forward. Overall property taxes, we collected $451,000 in the debt service, which was a little more than was budgeted, and we serviced that debt in accordance with the amortization schedule. That's how we had that budgeted. The water and sewer fund balance sheet, again, same situation. We'll be doing some additional accruals during the preparation for the audit. But we did end the year at $4.3 million in cash. We have construction in progress of $4.8 million. Notice that being up about $1.2 million from the prior year. That's the AMR construction for getting that project going. It's primarily finished at this point. So we put all the cost into that would be expected. So some of these numbers will be changing as well. We'll be showing that as finalized and capitalizing that under infrastructure. On the next page, the second page of the balance sheet, due to other funds, $1.1 million. That includes $600,000 that we're transferring again to the CIP fund for specific projects that will be done in the CIP plan. Also there you see that contingent liability of $1 million, so just to kind of give you information on subsequent activity, that's the liability that we kept in the balance sheet as Lone Star was paying that penalty all through last year. We have since September 30, we have wire transferred that money to Lone Star. They met the requirements of that agreement. They've been in compliance. So we did as we had agreed to, and we gave them that money back. See, going down, a lot of these numbers are going to change, like I say, when we make our financial statement, our preparation for the financial statement audit. The balance sheet will change some. On the statement of revenues for the water and sewer fund, we had just under $8.5 million of revenues. Expenses, we had a little over $5 million for net operating increase of $3.3 million. And again, there on supplies and contractual services, you'll see we're over budget on that line item. And again, that's due to some late invoices that came in after I did that first budget analysis. So we'll be amending the budget for that. Interest and fiscal charges shows to be over budget, but after we make adjusting entries for the full accrual basis, that will come in line. And then also transfers, that's where we've accrued for that additional $60,000 transfer over to the general fund, and we'll amend for that as well. Golf fund, I'll just briefly go down due to other funds. I want to point that out under the liability section of the golf balance sheet. That due to other funds is due to the general fund. You'll see that's come down again from last year. We're chipping away at that, trying to get that paid off as we have the ability to do that. That was $2.5 million about 3 years ago, so it's come down significantly. We'll keep getting that down to where it no longer exists. Overall for golf, on the statement of revenues, we had a little over $1.2 million in revenues, expenses of $1,395,000 for a net operating loss of $190,000. And then after transfers in, we have a net increase of $192,000. And so that's basically where that change in the big two be from between golf fund and the general fund. That's where that change is in that increase in the net position. New to this presentation, following that is a balance sheet and scheduled revenues for the two CIP funds. So I wanted you to see that where we've accrued for that a little over $2 million transfer from the general fund to CIP, most of which is that ARPA money, ARPA money. And then similarly on the CIP enterprise fund, we've accrued for that $600,000 transfer. And that was actually budgeted in the last fiscal year. So those are new, and you'll see as we go along and get that CIP plan up and going, you'll see more and more activity in those financial statements for those two funds. Any questions?
Questions for Joel? Just a comment, maybe I should, without digging in more, but it looks like the golf was better than what, that number.
Golf did pretty well this year. I don't know if that's still, would you say that's still from COVID?
We had a huge number of rounds, we were at 29, pushing 30,000 rounds this year. So we've had numbers were climate, COVID, or
And the
still
golf
playing a
course,
lot of rounds.
with all the rain, the golf course was in great shape most of the summer, so it may be drawing more than it would have otherwise, I'm not sure. That's all I have in the way of presentation on the financial report.
Okay. Would entertain the motion approved?
Make a motion that we approve the quarterly financial report.
Have a motion second to approve the quarterly financial report. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Thank you. All right, item number 11, consider and take appropriate action on September 30th, 2021 investment report by Finance Director Joel Wright.
So the investment report, we give you a disclosure of all of the cash balances, all of which are held in our depository bank, Happy State Bank, and our accounts there. For the general fund, we have a Poston checking account, where we do have some CDs. With our new depository contract, the bank agreed to give us a little bit better than prime on our interest rate, so it makes sense just to leave it on the checking account. We wouldn't be getting 0.3% on the other
Not having to move
options
back into the CD.
Right. In the past, we've had I've lost the acronym now. An investment pool that the bank provided, the overnight cash investment pool, and the return on that, it was actually less than 0.3%. So we're sticking with just keeping it all in cash, and it keeps us from having to move cash in and out of those accounts. So for now, until interest rates change, that's where we're going to keep that. Overall, our cash in the general fund is $5.4 million. Debt service, as I mentioned earlier, is $327,000. Water sewer fund is $4.3 million. Restricted cash was what was left of the 2012 certificates obligation. We've since spent all of that, so that's been used. Golf fund had a little over $107,000 at this point in time. And the capital equipment fund had $733,000 at the end of September. At this point, we had funded the internal service payments that come from the general fund, the water and sewer fund, and the golf fund into that capital equipment fund. So that cash is there used for budgeted capital expenditures here in fiscal year 22. So overall, we have just under $11 million in cash. However, a lot of that is already claimed. We we have $733,000 I just mentioned, that's capital equipment fund. We have that $1 million for Lone Star that we've since wired out. We have just under $2 million, that's the ARPA funds that's restricted and has been transferred to the CIP since. We have $120,000 that we budgeted for in last budget for the extension of 18th Street that would have moved over to CIP also. $600,000 that we have budgeted for in the utility fund for the force main, that's been moved over to the CIP. We've also moved the 10th Avenue sewer replacement funds in preparation for that project that got held over till next summer. We've moved that to the CIP. The Hunsley Road drainage repair at $310,000, we've gone ahead and moved that to the CIP. And the siren upgrade project, which may happen soon, we've got to move that over to the CIP as well. And then the debt service, that cash is restricted for servicing the debt. So actually that leaves us at $5.3 million of actually available cash. And there at the bottom I've shown you how that fits into our policy. So we have the policy in the general fund, 25% to 35% of our budgeted general fund expenditures as a minimum maximum target range. We're at $303,153,000, so a little above the minimum in the general fund. Utility fund, we're at 15% to 25% of budgeted expenses. We're at 1.9 million, which is it's about in the middle of the range. So overall, we're within our policy on the cash reserve. Any questions on that part of the investment report?
And Joe, we talked about before that reserve should fluctuate down and up, and right now should be the down.
September,
once we start collecting.
Yeah, September would be the lower time of the year with normal cash flow. We're entering in right now to collecting property taxes, so we'll peak out in January. That's when the majority of our property taxes will be collected, and then from there on it will start going down normal circumstances. Last couple of years have been kind of crazy with the extra funding we've been getting on these federal grants for COVID-related things, but that's where we stand. The second part of my report is required by our investment policy. This is to show you how our cash balances at the bank are being adequately collateralized by the bank. So the balances reported here are what's on the bank statement at September 30. Total cash in the bank, we have $11,853,000 at that point in time. The bank has pledged $13.3 million market value of securities to collateralize that or secure that cash, those cash deposits. So we are adequately collateralized by the bank at this point in time. Any other questions on that?
Make a motion to approve the investment report. You have a motion second. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Okay, item number 12, consider taking appropriate action on ordinance number 1150, an ordinance of the City Commission of the City of Canyon, Texas, amending the city's budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2020 and ending September 30th, 2021, as adopted by ordinance number 1158, providing for an increase of expected revenues, expenditures, and transfer of certain funds, providing that prior parts of the ordinance number 1128 inconsistent with or in conflict with any of the provisions of this ordinance are hereby expressly repealed to the extent of any such inconsistency or conflict, providing for severability and providing for an effective date.
So I've given you an exhibit that's supposed to be with the ordinance, but didn't get into the packet, but we'll get it in there with the final ordinance. This exhibit just summarizes those budget amendments that I mentioned as I was going through my presentation and the financial statements. These are the 6 line items that we need to amend. We've accrued for that $60,000 transfer between water and sewer funds, so this is showing both sides of that. The additional accrual needed for the invoice for landfill service that I didn't account for in that initial amendment, so I took that number down too far when we reviewed this last time. So I'm fixing that. We had a couple other invoices, actually 3 other invoices coming late. One in the water and sewer fund for some contractual services. Also, golf course had some repair parts, sprinkler repair parts, and merchant service fees that we didn't have accrued after I did that last budget amendment. So this is correcting for those budget amendments that we did before we got all these invoices in. I've also given you on the second page, I just kind of gave you a summary of revenue and expenditures for major funds. Since we've done a couple amendments now, this shows where we started at, how we amended it, revenues and expenditures. The first amendment and then also the second one, where we ended up final budget. Any questions?
It does not look like that is an action item. So, oh, no, we do need a motion.
You need a motion on what it is.
Entertain that unless there's any questions for Bill.
So ordinance 1150. Make a motion that we adopt ordinance number 1150.
Have a motion and a second. To adopt ordinance number 1150. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Okay, that takes us to item number 13, housing and growth assessment report.
Thank you, Mayor. We put together this report based off our strategic plan, recommendation of our strategic plan, just kind of showing where the growth area is going to be, some based off of actual numbers and some based off some estimates. As we go through, you'll see we put together 5 tables. There's one that's going to list a table of several projects we either have underway or sitting on projects. There's going to some that just staff forecast some potential growth areas. May or may not be some talks going on, just some simple areas. I think the staff agrees that these look like a good potential area for growth. And another table is going to be some subdivisions, a couple of subdivisions that we've already talked about that are out in our ETJ that we're in the process of working through. And the last couple of tables on here are going to just talk about, as you guys are really familiar with that growth area table A through F we see in the comprehensive plan, those recommended growth areas. What we did is we took those growth areas and just simply took those growth areas as a whole. And you can see that on this first image that Gretchen has up now. For example, in growth area A, just taking that complete area, growth area A, and assuming, as you'll see as we go through this, a lot of these areas, I'll assume either urban or rural. And when I look at something that's urban, estimate that as about 3.5 homes per acre. Rural areas assuming about 1.5 homes per acre, which means about a half acre, typically half acre lots is what I'm talking about. So you can see what those numbers are, and you'll see more about that on these charts here in just a moment. That next PDF, that next map, specifically shows those areas we've talked about in the past out east. The huge properties in there, and I pulled up several of the Kuhlman properties. We've had some visits with those guys. I think they would like to see those sold for developments. I don't know if they're interested in being development business anymore themselves, but these are the Kuhlman family properties that I looked at that were out east of I-27. That last growth estimate map you see are those properties that you guys are familiar with out north, starting from the left. You have that section 4 that we're in the process of purchasing. The Hunter Estates property, which is one of those ETJ developments I talked about. Spring Canyon, which is underway. The Kim Road property, that farthest right. But of course, that's something the city owns and would like to sell off for development purposes. Above that is some field property. I think Joe has some visits with the fields about the potential to develop those properties at some time. Just below and to the right of the Kim Road is that Stone Creek property, which is an ETJ development that we've had some concept plans and drainage studies are underway. Back down below, you see the Paula, Gerald, Rock Rose, and Crestview properties. Paula is a piece of property which you guys may or may not be quite familiar with. Out by the landfill going down Country Club, there's a dairy out there. And the Paulas have reached out to Joe about their piece of property. And there's 2 pieces of property. Those pieces of properties together, I've got some estimates on the growth there and the development there. What I call the Gerald property, or Section 3, we talked about, is another potential development area. Of course, Crestview Estates, and then to the left of that, or to the west of that, is Rock Rose development, which hopefully will be developed at some point in time. Going down to the tables on that last page, like I said, that first table is a group of either city-owned properties or properties that we're already in the process of communicating with or have already been approved. And over to the right, you can see where those have been authorized or in process or not approved. Spring Canyon, of course, is underway. I've listed, I know what the numbers are on some of these, and this is one of those numbers that we have. Their concept plan lists 511 homes. That comes out to about 1 home per acre. Crestview, we know the master plan shows 180 homes, and that comes out to about 2.4 homes per acre. A huge property, the concept plan shows 385 homes. The Kim Road property, I estimated that as, look at that as probably some rural style development with half-acre lots. That would come out to 360 homes. And again, Section 4, which the city's in the process of purchasing. In this table, I've estimated that at half-acre lots or rural style lots at 1.5 homes per acre. That turned out to be 930 homes. So you can see each one of these has a population estimate based off of those numbers. In this case, each one of those population estimates are listed. And that table has a total of 6,528. Those are scattered about, but you can see what each one of those potential growth areas are. The second table lists some of those areas we talked about. Again, I put Section 4 in here again as an urban style development, which would be 3.5 homes per acre. You had 511 homes versus 938 homes. The Gerald property, I listed that at 3.75. I think we obtained that 750 from an estimate from the developer or developer's engineer. Again, the field property, that was up north over north of the Kuhlman property. I estimate that at rural style, half-acre lots, 275 homes. Kuhlman properties all together, I estimate those at half-acre lots. If that was fully developed, that would be 2,500 homes. The Rock Rose development property we looked at over to the west of Crestview. That number of 2.25 homes per acre is an owner estimate. Again, the next table is extraterritorial jurisdiction. We have either plats or concept plans for both those properties. Stone Creek is 25 homes. I talked to Kobe, and he's looking at doing about 6 homes per year, so that'd be a 4-year build out. Hunter's Estates, the preliminary plats, 118 homes. And I'm estimating in this case, looking at who the builder is, I'm estimating that's my estimate of 50 homes per year. That would be a 2-year build out, and that would be fast. That's what I estimated. The last 2 tables are simply just again those growth areas. That's just taking those growth areas as a whole and breaking those out into 2 different sets of numbers. Either the first table being an urban style development at 3.5 homes per acre. And you can see there the total number of homes and the total population that would come out to you. And the last table being the comprehensive plan growth areas at the rural type design of half-acre lots. So it's just some numbers for you guys to look at, how much that means. It just kind of gives us an idea of how various areas could grow, and if everything grew, what we'd have potential for as far as population growth. And it's going to be a tool moving forward for us as part of that strategic plan to look at and give us some numbers, and we can refer back to these numbers as we start looking at utilities, and we start looking at our infrastructure and what we need to provide for those areas in an optimistic attitude. If we're going to look at those, this is all going to grow out, what do we need to do? Because as you guys well know, we're in a situation now where infrastructure is an issue. And that goes from water and sewer extensions all the way to our sewer plant south town. So it's just kind of a tool that we put together to, and it isn't just that. As I said, it's estimates. Some of those numbers are based off of plats and concept plans. Some of those numbers are based off of best guess, and some of those build out times are the same based off of best guess. Some of that's based off our experience in knowing who the builders are, how quickly they build, and some are based off of other builders who are more custom builders who are not going to build that quickly. So anyway, it's just a tool I want to put together and bring to you guys, and have you an opportunity to look it over and see if you have any questions or comments or direction.
Looks kind of it's great work. You also said thinking, some maybe not in the, comp plan, but like that's south of Outdoor Highway, 4th Avenue, and west of I-27. It's a pretty good sized area there too. I think as we talked to some folks and potential there, and then at some point the nesters, I think that's a pretty good spot right in the middle of all that too. So there's
more to that than
the southeast part of town. They've actually requested what it would take to have infrastructure there. So that's in the engineer's hands right now. So the developing engineer has made that request of what it would take for infrastructure.
That's south of.
Yes, sir. So the engineers are working on that.
And this table, you guys saw the first draft of this. And this is the table that is very easy to grow upon. And as those things come in, we can keep putting those numbers in. And I think it's just a great tool to keep expanding on and have some fairly decent estimates of what kind of units and what kind of population we're looking at in those areas.
I think this is a good tool.
Really, Danny, there's not one area on the map all the way around us that we haven't literally talked to somebody about at some point in time.
Yeah, all of these areas are something we either looked at, as the Coleman property is a great example. As a staff, we looked at and said, what happens if this goes, because we're certainly looking at the huge tied into that. If that comes on board, maybe that makes it more viable. So we sat down and visited those folks. I think we visited with everybody that's listed here. There's some more, like the mayor mentioned, there's some more we need to add to this now, and all very good possibilities. It comes down to, as it does, seems to be every time, is infrastructure and ability to serve. Because as you see, a lot of these are being presented as half-acre lots, and we don't have the sewer plant that so many of us dream of. Again, to help us grow, so it takes money.
Any other questions for Danny? Danny, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. That is really good information. All right, that takes us to item number 14, consider and take appropriate action on ARPA funded projects update. Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We received our first tranche of ARPA funds. Mr. Wright mentioned that earlier. Those came in late August of 2021. We have been informed that the second tranche of funds will come in 12 months from that date, so we're anticipating August of 2022. And so we have been mulling over what critical infrastructure projects are highest, what are on fire, what we really need to do. We've got two projects listed here that Adolfo will go into here in a second. We did put some considerations for the ARPA funds. Bo put this together for us on what these could be used for. I know Commissioner Jones, I know he's not here, but has talked about, some of the ARPA money, you would have to meet the executive order and mandate all of staff to be vaccinated. It doesn't appear that's the case on some of this stuff, because it does mention you do have to meet all executive orders. But it goes into those reporting and those provisions right now. The big piece is that we have to have these projects obligated by the end of 2024. So it's December 31st, 2024. They have to be expended by December 31st of 2026 at this point. So right now we're looking at two projects that are kind of on the high wire. 4th Street ground storage tank and the force main replacement to the wastewater treatment plant. Adolfo, if you want to come up. You'll have some attachments here that have opinion of probable cost. I will go ahead and throw out that we cannot do both projects more than likely. And we're doing our best with the supply issues to put inflation into these estimates at this time. Going into this, my gut would be that we wait a little bit. We're not in a hurry on some of this, and so maybe waiting on some of it to proceed forward might be our best option. But go ahead, Adolfo.
So the two projects, like I said, on the 4th Street pump station, right now you have 3 in-ground storage tanks, and they add up to about 1 million gallons. And they're old. I don't know if they leak or not, but when we had Garber come in and do the risk assessment, they were very concerned with those tanks. And they have been. We bid this project 11 years ago to replace those tanks and put in a new tank. And then other stuff came up when the project wasn't done. So it was a need then, it's still a need now. And that's the goal, to replace those tanks with a new ground storage tank, 1 million gallon pump station will still be there. And so that's the overview of that one.
That one's about shovel ready. It's ready to bid. So if there's no design work ready, it's ready to go.
Yeah, we have to tweak the plans a little bit, because when we did the Brown Road wells, we had somebody to go in and do some of the piping, which is like one of the 8 phases of that project. So that's done. We'd have to just adjust the plan. The estimate here takes into account a lot of inflation, because I can't predict inflation right now. It's hard. So, like Joe said, we may or may not be able to do both. Maybe we can, but I can't tell you it's going to cost so much and then it comes $1 million over. So I'd rather, take in the high inflation for 11 years based on our, original bids, and then say it could be up to this, but we just don't know. And like we said, because this is shovel ready, a lot of the engineering fees already been incurred, so it's minimal on the design phase of that job. So that one's good to go. Project 2, the force main replacement, that would be to replace about 2 miles of force main all the way out to the wastewater treatment plant. So that job, we've been talking about it for a while. I don't think it's a high priority, but it's also a priority. That force main was replaced, what was it been, 30 years ago, 25 years ago? With thin wall PVC pipe. It needs to be fixed or replaced before we end up with a big leak, where then you're going to have PCQ to deal with when you have a big hazardous waste at Minewood Lake.
Constructions.
early 80s, so that was put in the 80s. But if we replaced a lot of it already, this is the final stretch. So that's the goal of that job, is to go in and replace that old thin wall pipe with the new force main all the way up to the treatment plant. So that's the scope of the project. If you ask me what the higher priority would be, I think it'd be the 4th Street, just because we needed it 11 years ago, so.
And we were close to bidding that out.
We did bid it up. It was bid, ready to go, and then I think the money went to, was it Rough Road? Rough Road as well, so, we shifted gears at that point.
John Burton well knows, so I have been concerned about ground storage tanks before, so I'm gonna make a motion to proceed with authorizing city engineer and city staff to move forward with utilizing ARPA funds for these critical infrastructure projects. Bidding project 1236.
Is everybody okay holding and seeing if inflation comes down a little bit? We don't have to obligate it until the end of 2024. So it's 2021 December. The point on inflation, if it's lower by then. So.
Is it gonna act that big a difference?
Yeah.
Could, dollars wise, yeah. I think originally the force main was like 1.3.
Yeah, that pump station bid for, I think, 1.2 million, so it's closer to 2 million, no, about double. There's a lot of years that I did.
On the fourth main?
No, on that 4th Street pump station, that tank. So,
No, that was.
Timing's really critical on both of these, especially the 4th Street, as far as replacing those tanks. What time of year, trying to hit the right.
yeah, when it hit, like, off-peak season, so
Correct.
usually in the winter, when you want to work on a tank. Like, there's not a good time at the force main until we run continuously, is that true? So, that one could be,
To me, it is kind of a gamble too. I mean, a lot of construction stuff is just skyrocketed and gone up. It's a question whether it comes back down or not. I think, lumber actually has come back down, but I mean, most everything hasn't, so.
some stuff is gonna go down, like PVC went way up, but that was due to availability, and that availability is coming back, so that will go down. The problem with 4th Street tank is it's all concrete work, it's gonna be a lot of labor and not so much the parts. So it's a lot of work to build a concrete tank. And yeah, the cost of steel's gone up and the concrete's gone up, but I think a lot of it also is gonna be getting the crew and labor to do it. So, and I don't know if that's gonna be like that.
So it's either this winter or next winter, basically.
Yeah, well, if we do the, if we do the 4th Street, I mean, we're gonna need the next amount, but we could probably start the project and just make that amount. We don't have enough money right now, because we've got approximately 1.9 million, and the project's currently estimated at 3.4. So, if we do that project, we only have $500,000 left of our funds. But we won't get that money until next August, it's the second half of our our total funds to be received currently is $3.95 million. That's what we're estimating.
You do one and then start the other one after, because then we can at least bid one and know what it's at, and know how much remaining funds we have.
So we're making a motion that you.
I'm just asking if you're good.
Oh, okay.
Wait, this, the motion highlights 12 to 36 months right now. I wanted to know if y'all were comfortable if we wanted to wait, because of inflation and to do so.
There has not been a second, so I'll second. And yes, I'm okay with whatever y'all say. That's fine.
So is Dolphin saying we can go ahead and maybe start with just one?
We can, if we do like the force main, because you have the money for that, let's say it bids at 1.5 million, now you know that you're gonna have.
We could do the force main, but we're not gonna be able to do 4th Street if we do that. We won't have enough. And if staff, and I think Dan is going to unequivocally agree with Adolfo's opinion, is that correct? On the priority of projects
as I say that, we'll have a force main breakup tonight.
They're not
I'll be out there with you. I'll be out there.
We haven't had one in quite some time, so once we replace it.
A couple of years, but we never thought that last 2 miles would break, and it has twice.
But staff's opinion, and they agree with it also, is that 4th Street is the higher status at this point. And so, unfortunately, I don't think we can do both at this point.
So, it sounds like concrete work is a big part of the project then, of the expense.
It's a lot of demo. Yeah, it's a lot of labor because they have to demo and tear up the old tanks, there's 3 of them. And then you have to build the new tank, and it's concrete tank, just like the one at Kim Road. They have steel wire around the tank, and it's just, right now labor I think is the most expensive part, and then concrete's only so much. It's gone up maybe 25%, but I think what's going to kill you is the cost of having crews out there working every day for 6 months or a year, how long it takes to do that. So it's really costly labor project.
You know, we've talked about the well field expansion now, it's track 4. Will this project benefit?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have the same amount of storage, but you're going to have reliable storage, and the pump station will be a little more reliable and not have more of that.
Most of the water coming from the well field's going to 4th Street.
The Umbarga well field goes there. Any wells drilled on section 4, we'd like to have them routed to the same pump station. So if you have that piece completed, then eventually when we get to drilling those wells, that transmission line, that's where we go.
Brown Road services.
Yeah, the 4 Brown Road wells.
I think that's a reasonable assumption if you're talking about this winter versus next winter, that by the end, the whole inflation piece is, slows, interest rates go up some, that will slow down. Oh, Kelsey, what are you on?
This is the gamble, I mean.
Yeah.
If you say either way. Also, I'm not in the construction world really, so.
Just hope it doesn't get worse. I'm concerned.
I don't want to just keep waiting.
Yeah,
hoping things
I
will
like
get
to make
better, and then
decisions.
they takes it worse. I think it has to be a reasonable amount.
My gut would be, being that the project cost currently exceeds the dollar amount that we have in the bank for ARPA funds, we wait until we at least get the second.
I would agree with that.
And that would be August of this next year.
Can we look then and say, can we pull the trigger now? Or
Yep.
can we wait?
Yep, I think we can. That's absolutely. So we can head forward, motion here today, but that's our direction, that we're gonna focus on 4th Street.
There is a motion and a second on the floor.
Any further discussion on that? All right, we have a motion second to proceed forward with the ground storage on 4th. And take it that says we get the rest of the funds and it's a little bit. All in favor signify by raising your right hand. Those like sign. Motion passes. All right. Thank you. Okay, that now takes us to item number 17, executive session pursuant to 551.071 on consultation with attorney and 551.072 deliberations about real property and 551.074 board appointments. And at this time, we will, at 6:50, we will adjourn into the next session.
So, you know.
Gary, you think this,
A little bit over there.
Slide down, yeah.
Yeah, because there's stuff I gotta figure out, I mean, chief to designate. Well, you gotta designate a PIO. Maybe it's me. Yeah, maybe it's me. We gotta officially designate that. Make me work. They're gonna make me work.